Welcome to Break Forth Fully Alive.
We are Elsa and Arlen Salty, your hosts and the directors and founders of Break Forth Ministries.
We can all use a little inspiration in our day, and that's why Break Forth Fully Alive is here for you.
After 4 decades of holding events throughout the world, we're pulling together some of the best messages and classes from these events.
But before we get into today's show, we want to invite you to head over to our website at breakforthministries.com, where you'll learn more about our tours to the lands of the Bible, our resources, inspiring videos, workshops, our events, and more.
Now, let's get started.
Erwin McManus has committed his life to the pursuit of God and speaking out on the future of the church and its people. He's an accomplished author, speaker, and filmmaker, as well as the founder and lead pastor of Mosaic in Los Angeles, a church whose campuses are attended by over 5,000 people every week. To learn more about Erwin, go to erwinmcmanus.com. Many people have a dream that they want to pursue, but either it doesn't fit their life or they haven't made it their life. They're living a life out of obligation instead of passionately following the life that God has uniquely created them to live. Erwin shares about making your dream your life and living a life wide awake. Now, here is Erwin McManus.
I'd like to just pause and can we just invite Jesus to continue to speak to us tonight. Thank you, Lord God, for the gift of being in your presence and of how you elevate our awareness of you and how we are changed by something so gentle as your caress, your touch, your whisper. And it becomes something so powerful. You come like a rushing wind, like an earthquake shaking all of our foundations. And so tonight we ask you to do both, to speak to us in the most gentle, intimate way possible, and to disturb and disrupt everything in our lives that would hold us back from living the life you created us to live. And Jesus, we invite you to move us from our safe place to that place that we do not know, but we will know you. We pray in your name. Amen. So this past year, I wrote a new book. It's called Wide Awake. And if you ever do something more than once, you begin to realize that while you may be doing the same thing each time, it's fueled by something very uniquely different. For me, this book became very, very personal, very intimate. Because I began to discover in Los Angeles almost a human experiment. LA is one of those places where, well, it seems like they draw in the most talented and magnetic and charismatic and ambitious and attractive people from all over the world, and they come and live in LA with a dream of, well, being discovered. And over the last 16, 17 years, I've gotten to know thousands, if not tens of thousands of these extraordinary people. And they all come the same with this bright light in their eyes, ambitious, excited, certain that they're the next one. But what happens time and time and time again is that those people who were certain that this was the path to their extraordinary dream. And I can tell you, there was no difference between those people who were in relationship to Jesus Christ and those people who were not. Same dynamic. Because for most of them, those particular dreams did not become their life. And what I found was there was an endless number of people who then were paralyzed. They seemed overwhelmed by the reality that this dream wasn't going to be their life. And then you would think that people so fueled by a dream would naturally move to another dream, but in fact they didn't. It seemed as if they were so deflated and devastated that they wondered if their life had any significance or meaning or intention at all. And I began to realize that that there are very few people in the world that actually had a dream that fit their life and actually knew how to make it their life and actually made it their life. That those individuals were extraordinarily rare. And in fact, many people fell into, different kinds of categories. There are some people who were pursuing dreams that simply did not fit their lives. You know anybody like that? And that's what in the States we call American Idol. All right? I mean, we all like finding that really talented person. That's a lot of fun, but that's not really why we watch. I mean, we watch it for all the train wrecks. We watch it for all the people who lack self-awareness and have no idea who they are. We watch it because we love that person who has no talent, and when Simon says that was horrific, they look at Simon, certain that Simon is out of touch with reality. And the tragedy, of course, isn't simply that they're pursuing a dream that does not fit their life. That's the obvious, overt tragedy. But the real tragedy is that there is a dream that fits their life, and they have no awareness of it whatsoever. And I wonder how many of us actually fit in that category. And then there are people that are pursuing a dream that does fit their life, and you think that they would then be on the way, but they have no idea how to make that dream their life. And it seems so elusive, that it's so close they can taste it. They seem almost to be able to grab it, but when it seems so attainable, then it becomes a vapor. And a lot of it is because there's an endless amount of God talk that becomes more like superstition than it does wisdom. Because after all, if God's in it, right, it's just going to happen. Except when it doesn't. And then we don't know what to do. Pray more. Read your Bible more. Try harder. Have more faith. And in fact, that becomes the favorite, right? You just don't have enough faith. That's the problem, right? Because if you're pursuing a dream that does fit your life, then the only thing that you need to make your life is more faith. And so we're like, I believe. And we're spiritually constipated. We just can't get it out. And I apologize for that. And I wonder how many of us are there. There are some of you here tonight that are pursuing a dream that does not fit your life. And there's some of you that are pursuing a dream that does fit your life, but you have no idea how to make it your life. And then there's this other group of people I discovered that were no longer pursuing a dream at all. And the tragedy for me is that the dominant number of these people were actually people who declared Jesus as Lord. See, what I found is that our churches are packed with people who are not living the life they were created to live, but living a life they feel obligated to live. And so they're living a life out of obligation instead of a life out of passion. And we wonder why our churches lack the creative energy and the imagination and the inventiveness to make the difference in the world that we're called to make. There's this extraordinary passage that you know and you've read it 1,000 times again, but I want you to see it just from a slightly different perspective tonight. I want to throw out the possibility that maybe somehow along the way in the last 1,500 years, 1,000 years, 500 years, 50 years, I'm not sure exactly how long, but somewhere along the way, we lost our way. And we thought that the role of the church was to manage sin rather than to unleash the creative spirit. The book of Acts, in chapter 2, it begins in verse 14. You know this. This is the moment of the church's eruption in human history. How something starts should tell you about how it's supposed to finish. It says, then Peter stood up with the 11. He raised his voice and addressed the crowd. He said, fellow Jews and all of you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully to what I have to say. These men are not drunk as you suppose. I love this line. It's only 9 a.m. Don't you just love it? These are our forefathers, our founders. We're not drunk. It's way too early. Come back later. I mean, when this is your argument for sobriety, you're in real trouble. It's only 9 a.m. No. This is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. And I will show wonders in the heavens above and signs in the earth below, and blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and glorious day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And you see, almost the pendulum of Christian expression. If you lean more toward Pentecostalism, you really like the first part of chapter 2. Suddenly there was a blowing of a violent wind, and then tongues rested on them, tongues of fire that separated, and they all began to speak in other tongues. And we go, that's it. That's the critical part of this narrative. We need to all speak in tongues, and, we'll avoid the fire thing. Sounds dangerous. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, the evangelicals and the confessionals, and everyone who calls in the name of the Lord will be saved. No, that's the part that's important. Is calling on the name of the Lord. And it's almost as if we've had 2,000 years of conversations on these two extremes. You need this extraordinary experience. No, you need this declaration of truth. And we just absolutely avoided the middle. See, Peter, this is so important to God that God said it to the prophet Joel. So important to God that God made sure this minor prophet Joel was picked up by the fisherman Peter, who was not a theologian. It's so important to God that he gives it to Joel, then he gives it to Peter. And so important to God that God has Peter make it the metaphor, the central metaphor of the movement of Jesus that would mark all of history. So important to God that when Luke the physician was writing, and he was also the historian, taking notes, and you know Peter's sermon was longer than this. And so Luke had to narrow down, filter down, summarize the part that God wanted us to keep. So important to God that he gives it to Joel, then he gives it to Peter, then he gives it to Luke, then he sends it to us. So important to God that it's both in the old covenant and the new covenant, and yet it is not central to our conversation. That young men will have visions and old men will dream dreams. I'm sorry, that's the generic. Don't misunderstand me. Women are supposed to have dreams and visions. It's just the truth is that only men have dreams because women die young. No matter how old you are, you're still 29. Right? The church, the movement of Jesus in the last few hundred years, could anyone here in any sincerity say that the church has been marked as a movement of visions and dreams? At best, we're a movement of pastors and teachers, counselors and teachers. Sometimes we're a movement of administrators and managers. A lot of other times we're a movement of wardens and prison guards. But what would happen if our reputation around the world was you get close to this movement of Jesus, and the next thing that's going to start happening in your life is you're going to have a vision of your life that is bigger than you. You're going to begin to see a future that you're supposed to be a part of creating. What would happen if people knew? It doesn't matter how old you are. The moment you get in the environment of Jesus and the people of Jesus, what's going to happen is you're going to begin to dream again. You're never going to move into a retirement mode. You're never going to move into coasting. You're never going to feel irrelevant. You're never going to feel as if your life has no value or significance, because the moment you're around the presence of this Jesus, visions and dreams erupt out of your soul. Man, wouldn't that be something? That'd be something. See, I think we've gotten this thing wrong. We keep going to the church growth conferences and leadership conferences and strategy conferences to figure out what kind of church we're supposed to be, what kind of strategy we're supposed to have, what kind of structure we're supposed to have, what kind of methods we're supposed to pick up. And we keep forgetting that the most valuable resource that the Church of Jesus Christ has are people. That the Spirit of God dwells in us. And if we could begin to nurture the God-given potential and talent and giftedness in each person, the intelligence, the passions, the dreams in each person, we would see this powerful revolution that Jesus started once again move at full force. So let me ask you a few questions tonight, maybe to begin to rekindle in you the dreams and visions that are supposed to mark your life. See, because we kept getting so frustrated at Mosaic. Because our friends would come from around the world and try to figure out what was going on in our community. And why our little space and place and people have such a disproportionate amount of influence around the world. And they would always leave with the wrong conclusion. Oh, they have great films, and they have great dance, or they have cool space, or they meet in these neat clubs, or they have all this technology or this art, and it's none of that. Because there was a time we didn't have dancers. And a time we were not making films, and a time we didn't have painters, and there was a time where all the things that are there were not there, but what we had was the latent potential of all the people God was bringing us that had been ignored and undervalued. And really what was going on is that it was a human movement focused on the value of each person that we came in contact with. But I've discovered this. If you're not living the dream that God has for you, you're less likely to value the dreams of others. So let me ask you a few questions to kind of get you down the road. Because my goal for you is to begin to live the life of your dreams. Because wouldn't it be a tragedy if the life you were supposed to live just remained a latent dream inside of your imagination? So let me ask you, if your greatest dream became your life, would the world become a better place? See, because if you're like me, I have lots of dreams. For some people, their dreams are like elephants. They don't have too many of them. And when they give birth to one, it's huge. But it's painful. See, for me, dreams are like turtles. They're just not that, I just have a bunch of them. I throw a little sand and I leave them. And they all go running for their life. And the seagulls swoop down and eat them. And then the fish eat them. And they're just dying everywhere. But if I have one baby turtle who lives, I go, great. Because we're not all the same. Some of us are elephant dreamers and some of us are turtle dreamers. It's okay. But what I do know is you minimally have one dream that is being provoked inside of your soul. And that's the dream that is in the mind of God for your life. That's what God said to Jeremiah. He said, before you were born, I knew you. While you were in your mother's womb, I called you out. What God is saying is, before you took your first breath, you were a dream in my mind, God is saying. And so this is what I know, not only about Jeremiah, but this is what I know about you. You were in the imagination of God before you took your first breath. You were a dream in the mind of God before you took your first breath. So if you were a dream in the mind of God before you took your first breath, doesn't it make sense that while you're breathing on this earth, your life should be fulfilling the dream God had for you? And so what I know is this, it's somewhere deep inside of you, there's a dream waiting to be awakened that has been whispered into your soul by the Spirit of God. And sometimes what it is that, well, we were good at dreaming when we were kids, but we finally had to grow up. We had to, finally take on our responsibilities, and, well, we just gave up the dream. It was funny, I was in this debate at Columbia University in New York, and after I was in a debate with, I think, someone from the Department of Humanities and someone from the Science Department, and there I was. 2 PhDs, 2 doctors and 1 patient. And so the scientist basically, the question was, what can be known? Big question. And the scientists, of course, said what can be known is what can be proven through empirical evidence. And well, wow, that's good. And then the person from the Department of Humanities said what can be known is human action, ethics. And I go, wow, that's good. And then it was my turn to say what can be known. I thought, well, I'm really not an expert in what can be known. I am far more experienced in the subject of ignorance and what can't be known. But I said, but here's the funny thing is that I'm cheating. I know something I'm not supposed to know. But we'll get to that later. And so later when it got to the Q&A time, the first question that came up was a student saying, when you were a child, God was your imaginary friend like Santa Claus. And when you grew up, you gave up those imaginary friends. Why'd you keep God? I thought, what a great question. And I said, when I was a child, I did have imaginary friends. The Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, the giant rabbit that hid in my closet that only came out about 3 a.m, would scare me. And all my other imaginary friends, and God was sort of in that mix. And I did give up those imaginary friends when I grew up, but I didn't give up my imagination. Because is it possible that your imagination is the playground that God created inside of you so that you and Him could actually have life-changing conversations? And so maybe you don't have to start at the biggest place. Maybe it's too big to go, oh, I can't even imagine my life becoming the biggest dream inside of me. But if you begin to live the life that God created you to live, if you begin to take this dream and make it your life, if you ask the question, if this dream becomes my life, will the world become a better place? What will happen is you will begin to live your most heroic life. And the world needs you to live your most heroic life. And it can start small. I travel a lot, and so when I come home, our family time is a premium. And one day, Kim and my daughter Mariah said to me, honey, you've been gone, and we really would like for you to stay with us today. And I said, what are you going to do? And they said, we're going to go shopping. And I don't really like to go shopping where they go shopping. And so we went to this store, giant store, clothing store. And have you noticed that these stores are 99.9% women's clothes? And then they have the men's bathroom. That's our section. And so I'm wandering around trying to make sure I don't go into the wrong department and just waiting for them to finish shopping. When they finish shopping, we're in line and they need me, for my credit card. And so I'm there participating in the family experience, but I'm not really paying attention. There's an aisle right next to me, and there's this elderly couple, almost 90 years old, next to me. And I start overhearing their conversation. And the woman, she says, she only had one item, and she said, I need to buy this teapot. And she said to the man behind the register, do you have any kind of discount here? And he said, well, if you have our store's card, you can have a 30% discount. She started looking in her purse as if she might have the card. Then she paused and said, no, I don't have the store's card, but I really need to buy this teapot. Do you have any other discount? He said, ma'am, as I explained to you, if you have our store's card, you can have a 30% discount. And then she said, no, I don't have the card, but you don't understand. I need to buy this teapot. I almost burnt down my daughter's house and I destroyed her teapot, and I really need to replace her teapot. Do you have any other kind of discount? And he said, as I told you, ma'am, if you have the store's card, you can get a 30% discount. And as I'm listening to this, I'm sort of drawn into this moment. And I look, and the teapot's like $38 and some cents. So I reach in my wallet really quickly, and I realize I only have 20. So I tap Kim, and she's buying her items with Mariah, and I said, honey, do you have a 20? And this never happens, but she immediately looked in her purse and handed me a 20 without asking me what I wanted it for. And so I knew God was working. And so now I had $40, and me and the guy were right next to each other. He just hadn't been looking that way. There's nothing between us. So I said, excuse me. And he turned around, and we were right there. And I said, I'd like to buy that teapot for them. And he said, I'm sorry, sir, you're not allowed to buy the other customer's item. And I was really confused because I didn't know this was complex. And so I said, no, I want to buy their teapot for them. And the man and the woman were just embarrassed, and they're like, oh, no. And I said, no, I want to buy their teapot for them. And he looked right past me as if I didn't exist. And he looked to the other cashier and said, he can't do that, right? He can't just buy the other people's item for them. And I thought, you see, I'm an immigrant from El Salvador, and English is my second language. So I thought maybe it's a language issue. And so I held the $40 up where he could see them. And I said, I want to buy their item. But when he asked the other cashier if I was allowed to buy their item, I thought I better move fast. I mean, what are the chances that the two stupidest people in the world are working next to each other? And so I moved quickly because I thought, this is about geography. They're not teaching geography well anymore. And I'm standing in the wrong place. He doesn't realize I'm a customer. And so I went around the counter to where he was now servicing me. And when I came around, the woman's looking in her purse for money she doesn't have, saying, no, please don't. I'll buy it myself. And I felt so embarrassed because now everyone in the store knew this was going on. And I looked at her and I said, you would make me so happy if you let me buy your teapot for you. And then I turned to the guy and I held up the money and I said, I am going to buy the teapot. And I love this thing about we humans. We're so complex, right? We can speak at a surface language with words, but we also have other languages to speak, like reading between the lines. So when I said, I'm going to buy the teapot, I knew he understood me. That I was saying to him, in a second, I'm going to reach across this counter, grab you by the throat, smash your head against the counter. And then with your last breath of consciousness, you're going to take my $40 and give this lady her teapot. And then later, because I'm a Christian, I'm going to ask Jesus to forgive me, and he will. And so I left the money on the counter and I left so he couldn't continue the conversation. And Mariah and Kim and I walked out and it was pouring down rain outside. And we got in our car and I said, honey, I don't want to leave. I want to make sure she comes out with her teapot. I don't want the guy to keep the money and the teapot. And she was outside by herself. In just a moment, her husband had gone to get the car and she was so frail. And she had this one little teapot in her bag and she was shaking. She looked so distraught. And I wanted to jump out of the car and go and comfort her, but I thought, a Latino jumping out of his car in LA is probably not what she needs right now and to comfort her. And I looked at Kim, who is very warm, and I said, honey, would you go? And she goes, of course. And she ran out of the car in the rain. And next thing, I just watched this from a distance. I saw these two strangers begin a very brief conversation. And within seconds, this woman had her face in my wife's shoulder, and she was weeping and sobbing and shaking as my wife held her. And when Kim got back to the car, I said, what did she say? And she said, I used to own my own restaurant. I used to be able to buy everything I needed, but my life has come to this. My life has come to this. And then she just kept saying, thank you, God bless you, God bless you, thank you, God bless you. You know, maybe it didn't change the world. But I have a sense that if all of us began to live our most heroic life, if we began to ask the question, what dream is waiting inside of me? What is this picture of what it looks like to be human, of living life? What kind of world can we imagine if we just every day made some small steps, took some small action in some small way, said, I'm going to be a part of making this world different? I have a feeling that the movement of Jesus would have so much momentum that the world will be running to the one we worship. If your greatest dream became your life, would the world get better for the rest of us? Because those are the kinds of dreams and visions that Jesus came to unlock. All right, second question. Is there a dream that you're supposed to be living that is trapped under the rubble of your past? You see, what I find so many times is that when we were dreamers, when we were younger, what happens is, we dream dreams that are so big and so ridiculous and so outlandish that when we pursue them, we crash and burn. And we immediately begin to assume that just because it didn't happen, because it didn't work, that's not the dream we're supposed to be living. You see, we live in a mythology of greatness. Because we get to see greatness every day. Turn on the TV and you get to see greatness. And you get to see Tiger Woods play golf and LeBron James play basketball and you see the very best in the world performing at their best, but what we don't see is the hours and hours and days and weeks and months and years of discipline and hard work and struggle that they went through to come to that place where they make greatness look so easy. See, just because God called you to something doesn't mean that God promised it was going to come easy. I think many of us have accepted a life beneath the life God created us to live because the one God calls us to is simply harder than the one we've chosen. See, Wide Awake isn't about how to find a more comfortable, easier, safe, secure life. When God began to breathe into Joseph the dreams that he had for him, and they called him a dreamer, his life went spiraling downward. And I can imagine there were many, many dark, cold nights where he wondered, God, why have you abandoned me? I wonder how many of us, there is a dream that is waiting for us, but it's just trapped under the rubble of your failures. It's trapped under the rubble of your doubts. It's trapped under the rubble of your insecurity. It's trapped under the rubble of your history. And what you need to do is to realize that God wants to take all that rubble in your life and create something extraordinary. That no matter how many times you failed in the past, that doesn't make you a failure. I to this day can't even believe I get to write books. It's kind of ironic. First through 12th grade, I was a straight D student. I couldn't even get into college. I had to go a year later after I was just cooking hamburgers and cooking pizzas and doing nothing, and I had to beg my way into a school. And then they predicted that I would flunk out. I remember the last day of my senior year in high school, I turned in like 20 different projects to my English teacher that I'd procrastinated on the whole year long, and she was so upset. And she said, Erwin, have you ever thought about going to college? I said, maybe. And she said, you will never make it. I said, thank you. I remember in 7th grade, my English teacher brought me a paper I wrote, and there's a big giant F on it in red. She said, this paper's horrible. You're going to take it home and you're going to write it again. I said, well, what do you want me to change? She goes, I just want you to write it in a way I can read it. And so I went home and I tried to write it again, but I have no fine motor skills. So when I brought it back the second time, I was not only more nervous than the first time, but I was more tired, then it was worse, so she gave me an F again. But this time she didn't decide first time I was stupid, this time I'm rebellious. So the third time she made me miss the bus going home and made me write the paper again in front of her, which even made it worse. And the papers just kept getting worse, and I got a third F in English. I just wish for one moment she had paused to ask the question, is it possible there's anything in the content that is worth commenting on? And so I had a history of failure in my life. Well, when I went forward, the same day my brother went forward to say that maybe God was calling me into some kind of, vocational ministry. I didn't know what the Christian language was. I was this shy, reclusive, introverted person who had spent time with a professional counselor when he was 12 years old and had been in and out of a hospital for psychosomatic illnesses. And I was so socially awkward and disconnected from humanity that when my brother, who was the star quarterback and broke all kinds of passing records playing football and the fastest kid in the United States in 6th grade, and he just had all this capacity. And so when he went forward with me the same night, they came and hugged him and said, we knew God was calling you to ministry, because that's the kind of person God calls. And then I thought, in a minute, I'm going to get my family hug affirmation. And then the very person who hugged him and said to him, turned to me and said, but what in the world is God going to do with you? It's okay. They were right. God was asking the same question. See, this is what I know. There are some of you here that have allowed your circumstances, they've allowed your failure, you've allowed your failures, you've allowed the voices in your life, you've allowed all these negative things to press against you and say to you, you do not have what it takes to make a difference in the world. And I want you to know that's a lie. I wonder if there are dreams that God has placed in your soul that are trapped under the rubble of your fear and doubt, your insecurity, your sin. And you're missing this great moment in your life. So it's so ironic to me that I ended up writing books. And I remember when I tried to write my first book, it wasn't because I thought, I need to write books, the world needs me. It wasn't like that at all. It was because our church was trying to do something huge in LA, and we did this fundraiser thing. And everybody was supposed to pledge how much they're going to give over 3 years. And I went home and I told my wife, I think we should give $25,000. And we were only making like $30,000. And my wife's very competitive, so she says, why not 35,000? Okay, it's, we're 30,000. And so I said, all right, it's 30. And when it came around a year later, we'd only given like 2,000 because, we gave our tithe, and then it was very hard. My wife got a job as a teacher at a Christian school, which meant we were losing money. It's true. At the end of the year, our accountant said, your wife needs to quit if you're ever going to fulfill this. And then I had a publisher call me and say, we heard this talk, could you turn it into a book? And I said, well, send me a contract. And they sent me a contract for $25,000, which is exactly the amount I thought that God told us we should give. So I was right. And so I signed the contract, but I didn't take a penny because I didn't know if I could write a book. I didn't know if I could finish a book. And I knew that if I took the money, I'd never give it to the church. We just spend it by accident. So I said, don't send me the money. If the book is what you want, then send it all in one lump, and then we'll give it to the church. And 3 weeks before the deadline, I had 20 pages for a 350-page manuscript. And I was not even going to sleep at night because I can type about a word a minute, so I couldn't get it done. And then this woman came up to me named Holly, and she said, Erwin, I hear you're trying to write a book. And I said, yeah, kind of. And she goes, well, I've been sending you emails to see if I could help you, but you never respond. And I said, well, what do you do? And she goes, well, I work for Sidney Sheldon. He wrote like 50 novels and created Patty Duke's show, Heart to Heart, I Dream of Jeannie, those shows. And she goes, he talks all of his books in. And I'm his stenographer. I type 149 words a minute. And you talk a lot, and maybe you could talk your books in just like Sidney does. And I thought 149 words a minute, that's 148 faster than me. And so she volunteered her free time, and in 45 hours, I finished my first book. And I realized what happened was that this God-given capacity inside of me was trapped under the rubble of all my past failures. And it was almost as if the moment that happened, God was just removing all these boulders and all this rubble and all this damage and saying, there are things inside of you that you don't even believe are there. And I just decided to start believing what God was saying about me than what all the voices in my head were saying about me. And I wonder tonight what dreams are waiting to be born that have died. Or you think they're dead, but they're just dormant underneath the rubble of your life. And then just one last question. So if your dream became your life, would the world become a better place? Now, are there dreams that are just waiting? They're haunting you and taunting you and calling you and wooing you that are there, and you're so afraid you think that it's too late for you. The last question, are you willing to take the risk from the life you have today to the life you were created to live? Now, I'm not saying that all of you aren't living the life you're created to live, but I have this strange suspicion that most of us, that we've accepted a life that is within our control than a life that is out of our control. It can only be explained by our life being entrusted and controlled by God. I wonder tonight if there's a first step you should take right now, a first step you should take tomorrow, a first step you should take this week. I wonder if you already know what course, what direction, what dream, what destiny you should be pursuing with your life. Maybe it's a small thing or maybe it's huge, but it all begins the same way. It begins with one courageous act in a new direction. I started working and telling stories to other mediums. And so I started really trying to learn filmmaking, and we started making short films, and I started getting more involved in the process. And I have a friend who writes for a TV show, and he called me up and said, Erwin, I have a short film, and it's about an assassin. And when I wrote it, I was thinking of you. And he said, I was wondering if you'd be willing to play the assassin for this film. And I said, I've always wanted to be an assassin. I mean, play an assassin. And so I thought, sure. And so I began the process of trying to learn what to do. And so I met a friend who was an actor, and he said, hey, I'll take you to my acting coach. And so I went over there a couple of times, and it was a little strange. And it was fun. And then another friend who is a stuntman on films, and he said, look, I'll be your stunt coach. And I said, sure. So he started taking me through stunt training, and I started learning how to do stunts, and it was kind of fun. And I only missed the mat a few times, but it really only takes once. And to be more careful. And then I had to use a gun, so this professional peacekeeper and international peacekeeper for the government came, and he taught me how to use a gun, and we went to a shooting range and learned how to do all this. And so I was trying to learn the whole process of this. And it was really very, very exciting, but I didn't really connect all the dots. God kept saying, I want to do my own stunts. I want to do my own stunts. And I didn't really understand that I was going to get thrown out of a 5-story building and being thrown headfirst through a skyscraper glass. And the course told me, you can't actually go down the 5 stories. That's illegal. And I said, well, can I go through the glass? What a stupid thing to ask. And they go, well, if you insist. And I said, yeah, I want to do the stunt. I want to go through the glass. And so the day came of the stunt. We're on the roof of this building in Hollywood. And all of a sudden, it's more complex than I thought. Because I thought it was going to be Hollywood glass, candy glass. The kind where it looks dangerous, but it's not. I was all for that. But then they said, no, we can't use candy glass. I said, why? He goes, because it breaks wrong. He said, it needs to be real glass. The scene is authentic. And I'm like, okay. I said, so what do I do? Do I just does he just throw me through? And he goes, oh, no. He can't throw you through. You have to jump. It'll look like he threw you, but it'll be you jumping. And I said, so when I jump, which part of me will break the glass? And he goes, oh, you actually can't break the glass. The glass is so thick that we actually have to have a detonation team, and they blow the glass up the moment your face hits the glass. And then I hear the explosives detonation team talking to the assistant director and director saying, we shouldn't let him do this. This is really dangerous. The guy said, I haven't slept all night. It's the most dangerous stunt we do. And then I met the professional stunt guy, and he had a huge scar across his neck with 20-something stitches. And I said, where'd that come from? He goes, from doing that stunt you're about to do. And he goes, the glass didn't break right. It came down and it guillotined me, and they had to sew me up on the set without any anesthesia. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't need this. Right, in my life, but it was too late. Right, and then next thing I knew, they're clearing the whole set. So everybody off the set. And I said, why are you doing that? They said, well, to protect all the crew. And you're not protecting me. And so I'm on this block, and then there's 3 different pane glasses. I said, what are the other 2 for? And he goes, well, in case the first take doesn't work. I'm telling you, I guarantee you this is going to be a 1-take scene. And I just know that instinctively. And so I'm looking at this thick skyscraper glass. I'm watching them put the explosives on the glass in strategic places. I'm watching them move all the crew and cast and cover the cameraman so he can't get hurt. And then right before I'm going to jump, they start giving me the detail instructions. I'm not good at details. He said, oh, by the way, close your eyes because you don't want to go blind. And close your mouth because you don't want to die. Said, all right, I go through like this, which is not going to look that good on camera. And then they put a camera underneath me so they could catch the flight, which I thought was going to be a lot of fun. But all of a sudden, he said, we're going to count 3, 2, 1, then you jump. And I want to be real clear. Do I jump on 1? Do I wait till after 1? And because the timing has to be exactly right. And my heart was pounding, and I realized I am overwhelmed with fear. And I heard 3, 2, 1. Honestly, I don't even remember jumping, but I have it on film. Somehow, when I heard one, I just and I remember what he said. He goes, you got to trust me. If you hesitate, you're going to get hurt. You got to go at that glass with all the strength and fury you have, because that's the only way this is going to work safely. And so when I heard one, I just attacked that glass head first. And I remember hitting it. And then I remember feeling as if jet engines were put on my back. And I went through that glass. And then I was laying on the ground. They told me not to open my eyes until they finished blowing it all off the glass. And then when I opened my eyes, I had blood all over my face because glass cuts. And then it finally came to me. This is what the faith journey is like. You see, we want God to do everything that makes our life unique. We want him to give us the dream and then to make the dream our life. But our journey with God, with Jesus, is just like this moment. See, there are things that you cannot do for yourself that only God can do. He's the one that sets the detonators to make sure it explodes just in time to get you through to the other side. But there are things that God calls you to do that he will not do for you. And if you stand paralyzed on one side and refuse to muster the courage to go through what seems to be an impossible obstacle in your life, you will never find yourself on the other side of this life. I know this about you. Before you were born, you were a dream in the mind of God. Before you took your first breath, he already dreamed of you. Wouldn't it be a tragedy that you would take your last breath and that dream never become the life you lived? What would happen if the movement of Jesus became known around the world as the place where each person was valued, where we discovered and developed and unleashed the God-given potential inside of every person, where each of us, like Joseph, became the dreamer. And even when life seemed like a nightmare, we lived life with such confidence that we knew suffering in a moment is nothing when you're pursuing the dream you're created for. There are dreams that will both terrify you if you pursue them and torment you if you ignore them. And maybe tonight it's time to step up and live with your eyes wide open, to live wide awake, and to live the dream rather than just dream of living. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Break Forth Fully Alive podcast. We pray you were richly blessed.
But before we leave you, we want to remind you again to head over to our website at breakforthministries.com, where you'll learn more about our tours to the lands of the Bible, our resources, inspiring videos, workshops, our online and in-person events, and more.
Until next time, may you become fully alive in the love of God.